All right, I'm going to talk to you today about trust frameworks. From your perspective, your perspective as an ecosystem operator, you are the trust framework operator. So these are the rules and tools that are going to meet the expectations of participants in your digital identity and agentic ecosystem. All right, so what is it? We talk a lot about trust frameworks. There's a lot of discussion, and there's been decades of discussion in the industry about it. There's a set of core operational components that you have to put together and make decisions about. The rules, the legal agreements, how you're going to handle audits and any certifications, how you protect consumers, and potentially a federation platform, a platform for operating this. There's a lot more in some of the other videos about that. And what you're doing is you're managing the participants in your ecosystem from all different perspectives. They could be users, they could be identity providers, and I'll call them identity providers from the open ID sense. However, these are also any issuers of credentials that are providing PID or MDL, mobile IDs into your system. And then you have infrastructure providers. They're providing component pieces all across your ecosystem, such as wallets, registrars, readers. They're providing the base of this. And then you've got relying parties or service providers. So these are the users are going to interact mostly with relying parties and service providers, with those infrastructure providers along the path. So you are managing all of those roles. You're managing the expectations that each of those participants has in the roles, and those expectations are different from society to society. So you need to understand who your audience is and how you're setting up these rules. All right, so now let's talk. I'm going to talk about all of those different component pieces one at a time. You've got some real framework pillars in the system rules. How are you handling identity? What are the levels that you're going to use? What is the credential formats that would be issued? How are those credentials presented? And when I say credentials, I can mean wallet credentials, I can mean login credentials. So they are the same. And I can mean the credentials that an agent would have that authorize them to act on behalf of any particular user or relying party in the system. What are the controls you'll put in place on top of that? So there's, for each of the roles and the participants in those, they're going to be controls. There'll be sort of a policy library, hopefully, that you can put together. They might start operating without that. Liability assignment, which again could happen before, it could happen after, but at some point in time, it needs to be clear who's liable and who's accountable for the decisions. And then any trust marks and mechanisms, we'll have lots more in other videos on trust marks and mechanisms, but any of those that you put in place. And then the enforcement of that. What are the mechanisms that you have within your ecosystem to provide enforcement? And you may have to create some of them, and some of them may grow organically, and some of them may come from regulation. So you need to understand how those rules are going to get enforced and have an operating model for those. Then the other side of this is privacy. So this is one where it's not necessarily by default going to get built in. So you have to be the one to be building privacy, meeting the expectations of the end users who may not have as much of a voice in your system except through civil society. You need to be able to have core user-centered privacy rules for them that fit what they're expecting. And then a notification framework, some way that participants in the ecosystem can find out. So all of these together become the system rules that you put in place for your ecosystem. And again, it could be from regulation, it could be from policy, it may just be an assumed for a while and operating with assumptions for a while and operating on reputation. All right, agreements. Again, so these are easiest to be done. A bilateral agreement would be every two parties within the system have some sort of contractual agreement between them, or there's legislation backing that. Multilateral agreements would mean you as the ecosystem operator have set up what it means within each role, and you get them to sign on, you get the participants to sign on to those agreements in some form. And it might be that it's just through a registry. They become registered somewhere. By registering, they understand what their operational commitment is. what their foundation is, and they register in and become a part of it. But those agreements are key because they're the ones that are going to create the platform on which you can operationalize and that you can assess conformance. And then, of course, a key thing here is redress. When something happens that goes wrong, how does that get resolved? Conformance I mentioned before, so this is a key part of it. So what are the system rules? How are you going to convey the fact that there is conformance by any participant in the system to those system rules? And you'll see a lot of these in different places as trust marks, because you've got Better Business Bureau, right? Or the equivalent of that in wherever your country is. That's a listing or a seal that says that they are, you see this on websites too. You see trust marks, and then even active ones where you might set up active trust marks. There'll be a lot more on this in other videos, but active trust marks like the lock icon on a web browser, which says actively there is some form of a trust relationship that the end user can see in real time. So how are you going to audit these? How are you going to have enforcement of these? What mechanisms are you going to use to convey that trust between the different participants, and what's your governance structure for this? And again, governance structures differ from all around the world. So we'll have more on another video on the different styles of governance of ecosystems. Again, bring this down to one more thing on conformance to system rules is consumer protection, because this is a key part of it for end users to feel like they will trust the system in order to take part of it. Those consumer protection rules, privacy rules need to be in place ahead of time. And here we are, privacy and compliance. This could be done by brand. That's one way, but brand tends to keep the playing field not quite level because smaller, innovative players might not be able to break in because another brand is dominating the market. You as an ecosystem operator can choose to sort of equal that out. Part of the ways that you can equal that out are to set up what your core protections are and allow maybe even levels of protection and allow participants in the ecosystem to express that either through trust marks or guarantees or active registrations, active registries, where they're protecting the consumer. So, and you can know this true. The ones with reputation may not be the ones that are actively protecting the consumer, whereas the smaller players in your ecosystem might. So that balance is a critical thing that you'll take into account as you go through the operating your ecosystem. And a platform. These are the choices that you make to convey trust elements, to convey these trust marks across between the participants in the ecosystem. And you may do this without a platform because you could have just really spotty different operating platforms around within the ecosystem that are providing component pieces of this. You could do this by in a really centralized approach where there is in these centralized approaches where trust elements are centralized or distributed centrally or distributed through a hierarchy. It's really key to make sure that none of the transactions and none of the information are also subject to flowing through that centralized hierarchy. And then as you operate this platform, whether that's through discovery services, which will be a key part of it, enabling participants to discover other participants or discover the trust elements for other participants, that's a key part of it. And when there are conflicts about that, are you providing some mediation? Are you providing something that's going to resolve that without, before it would become a legal issue, before it would go into the courts? And a web presence so consumers can see what your platform, what your trust framework does. So you'll need a really high level description so that people can understand it and people can see that their concerns have have been taken into account and will be managed. And then you'll need some really you'll need the detailed agreements that people will sign. Now, how does this all fit? And this at the end is kind of like throwing it in at the end, but what's the business model that you have? Is there a membership fee for participation in it? Is this what's going to sustain your ecosystem and keep it operating, and then keep it so that enforcement can happen? So, and again, you can rely on legislation for this, or you can set these up yourselves. And different styles of ecosystems, like public ecosystems, very private ecosystems, such as like in a healthcare setting, they may have different business models and different membership requirements. And then, of course, reporting, because transparency is key for all of this. Hopefully that will be a really good start overview in it, and then we'll have more information in the further documents on the platform. Thank you.